Hello, I'm John Allure. Before you listen to this episode, a couple of things. These are podcasts from the first season of Who Killed Theresa. They haven't been heard in over 4 years. They're raw. It took me a while to develop a style. A lot of people like them that way, unvarnished. Others commented that it was amateurish. Nonetheless, here they are, unedited. I haven't gone back and listened to them. I haven't cleaned them up. Thanks for listening, and once again, life isn't fair, justice is blind and dysfunctional, and some cops aren't smart and dedicated like on television. This is Who Killed Theresa. Hello, welcome to Who Killed Theresa. I am your host, John Allure. I am the brother of Theresa Allure, who was murdered in Quebec in 1978. This is a podcast about murdered and missing people. It's a show where life isn't fair, justice is blind and dysfunctional, and some cops aren't smart and dedicated like on television. So to start things off, I'd like to give you kind of the summary, the Coles Notes, Cliff Notes version of the case for people who are unfamiliar with it. And I'm just going to read from the Wikipedia page on Theresa, which I can do because I wrote it, so there's no copyright problem or anything there. So, for those unfamiliar with it, this is the scaffolding for the entire affair. Theresa Allure was a 19-year-old Canadian college student who disappeared on Friday, November 3rd, 1978, from Champlain College in Lennoxville in the eastern townships of Quebec. 5 months later, on April 13th, 1979, her body was discovered in a small body of water approximately 1 kilometer from her dormitory residence in Compton, Quebec. Upon her disappearance, police initially suggested she was a runaway. When her body was discovered, police then suggested that she was the possible victim of a drug overdose, perhaps with the assistance of fellow college students. In the summer of 2002, the family of Theresa Allure enlisted the support of an investigative reporter and friend, Patricia Pearson, who produced a series of articles for Canada's National Post newspaper that presented compelling evidence that Theresa Allure was a victim of murder and that her death was possibly linked to 2 other unsolved local cases: the death of 10-year-old Manon Dubé in March 1978 and the murder of Louise Cameron in 1977. This theory was supported by geographic profiler and then FBI consultant Kim Rosmo, who suggested a serial sexual predator may have been operating in the Quebec region in the late 1970s and advised police to investigate the 3 deaths as a series. Rosmo later gained notoriety when in 1998 he suggested that Vancouver police create a serial killer task force to investigate the multiple cases of missing women from Vancouver's downtown east side. Robert Pickton was eventually arrested and found guilty of 6 of the murders, though he was accused of and implicated in an additional 26 murders of Vancouver missing women. The deaths of Theresa Allure, Manon Dubé, and Louise Cameron remain unsolved cold cases. And since 2002, I have kept a website called Who Killed Theresa, and I continue this investigation. And I've geographically identified an additional 16 unsolved murders from 1975 to 1981, which may be associated. And these related cases are Sharon Pryor, Lee Choquette, Louise Cameron, Jocelyn Houle, Chantal Tremblay, Joanne Dorion, Hélène Monast, Catherine Hawkes, Denise Bazinet, Manon Dubé, Lison Blais, Theresa Allure, Nicole Goudreau, Tammy Leakey, and 2 unidentified bodies of women. only Quebec has this kind of thing. Typically, you go from senior or high school right into college. That's the same in Canada, but in Quebec, there's sort of an intermediary step. When you graduate from high school, you have to do 2 years of cégep. It's sort of preparation for college, and then you can make the decision that you're going to go on and actually go to a college or university or possibly a vocational school. And that short period of 2 years, that it's only a 2-year stay in which students come together very quickly and then disperse, will have significance in this matter. So in the fall of 1978, my sister had been out of school for a year, I think a couple of years. She was at a different college in Montreal originally called Vanier College. She dropped out of Vanier College and just kind of joined the workforce. She was working along, I guess it's Highway 40, just off Gouin Boulevard in the West Island of Montreal. She worked for a while in a ski factory. She worked for a while in a bottle or jar making factory. I don't know, something like that. And she lived on her own in an apartment with a friend on St. Charles Boulevard in the West Island. But having had a taste of what real life was like, she didn't like it, and she asked my parents, could she go back to school, and they said yes. So that fall, she joined my brother, who was actually 1 year younger than my sister. My sister was 19 at the time. My brother was 18. I was 13, 12, something like that. But because she had dropped out, he was now ahead of her in college. So he was already there, and she joined him in that fall. So she would have arrived sometime in early September. So the window between her arrival in this small college town and her death is a very short window. It's about 2 months. And things are initially very routine. She's going to classes. She's studying. There's no real indication of anything unusual. She's making friends. All of this kind of stuff. And perhaps we should give you a little bit of the geography here, because that too is unique. So the Champlain College is in the town of Lennoxville, which just buttresses up against the city of Sherbrooke in the eastern townships of Quebec. And it's kind of like it's an English college in a very French enclave. But Lennoxville, the town of Lennoxville, is very English. The city of Sherbrooke is predominantly French. So you have this sort of unique quality going on. And Champlain shares its campus with the bigger college, Bishop's University. So they share facilities, and typically what would happen is somebody would finish at Champlain and then perhaps go on to attend Bishop's, older students, etc. So that's where classes take place, and there are some residents in the town of Lennoxville, and some people live off campus, up the hill. But for about 200 students, there was a residence shortage. And to solve the problem, until new facilities were built, they housed about approximately 200 students off campus, 10 kilometers away in the town of Compton, which is 10 kilometers into the countryside south of Lennoxville. And the Compton residence, there's two buildings. There's a main building called King's Hall. Which was formerly an all-girls boarding school. The place is still there now. You can go see it. And looks. The first thing that comes to mind when I look at it is it looks like the hotel in The Shining. That sort of I don't know how to describe it, with like deer heads on the wall and this kind of thing. Creepy as hell. And that's where they put these people, these students. And then there's a more modern residence next to it. By modern, I say it's built in the 60s. It was probably built in 67 at the 100th anniversary of Canada. It has that look to it, the way anything built in 67 looks, modern for its era. So there's some people living in the older facility. There's some people living in the more modern one. My sister lived in Gilliard. My brother lived in Kings Hall. And I don't think my brother had a roommate. My sister did have a roommate. So she's living there. And what you would do is you would your typical day would go like this. You'd wake up in Compton. You'd have to take a bus in, like a school bus, into Lennoxville. You'd attend class all day. You'd have lunch in the Lennoxville or the Champlain College cafeteria. You'd finish your classes. If you were lucky enough to catch an afternoon bus, you'd go back to your residence and eat dinner there, study, party, whatever you do. But if you miss that bus, typically there weren't, it's not like today where you have 20-minute or hourly bus service. There were essentially 3 buses, and if you missed the afternoon bus, you had to wait for the last train, which was around 10 or 11 o'clock at night, or you could hitchhike, and many students did, so that's kind of the way things looked. On the evening of Friday, November 3rd, 1978, my sister's day was almost exactly as I just described, and she missed that afternoon bus. She was expected to meet up with friends back at Gilliard House to listen to records or something. She said she might drop by. She had a paper to prepare, and she was thinking of working on that. So some speculate that after missing the bus, she might have gone to the library and worked on that paper for a bit. Some speculate that she might have hitchhiked. But after about 5 or 6 o'clock at night on the night of November 3rd, she's sort of not seen again. I'm leaving out some details, but that's kind of like the last official sighting, or I should say group sighting, where multiple people who could corroborate things see her. And then she disappears. And at this point, I think what might be interesting is I'm gonna stop things right now, and I'm gonna read from a report that a private detective prepared, a private detective that my father hired in the weeks after Theresa's disappearance. And because I think no one has ever heard this before. I've certainly had it, and I've used it to prepare information. But I don't even know if the police have ever seen this. But my father hired a private detective named Robert Bulak because my parents were unsatisfied with the job the local police were doing with the investigation. And Bulak arrived in town and proceeded to shake things up. And with that, I'm going to leave it here, and now I'm going to read from Robert Bulak's report to my father, which would have been prepared, I believe, in December of 1978. Strictly confidential. Client, Robert Allore. Re, Theresa Allore. Investigation into the disappearance of Theresa Allore. At the request of our client, Mr. Robert Allore, we are attempting to trace the present whereabouts of Miss Theresa Allore, the client's daughter, missing since November 3rd, 1978. This report is a summary of our findings to December 15th, 1978. 1. Inquiries and other activities. Our investigation began November 27th, 1978. Since that date, we had visited the campus of Champlain College in Lennoxville and the students' residence in Compton on 7 occasions, in the course of which we interviewed over 100 students, faculty members, and staff who did have or might have had information pertinent to our inquiries. We also contacted several of Theresa's friends in the West Island of Montreal. We conducted a thorough physical search of the 2 buildings which house students in Compton, as well as of the grounds and roadways surrounding them, and questioned local residents. We made inquiries in person in 2 Buddhist monasteries in Dorion and Magog, contacted several police officers assigned to the missing persons and legal identification sections of the Montreal Urban Community Police Department, checked several times with the main morgues in the province, and turned over all our significant findings to the director of the Lennoxville Police Department, who in turn assisted us in some of our inquiries. 2. Salient facts. Theresa's movements on the Sunday evening which preceded her disappearance, October 29th, 1978, may be summarized as follows. She had supper around 6 p.m. in Compton and sat at the table where Jean Edisford was then eating. Theresa appeared and sounded normal, and the conversation centered on the previous day's hiking expedition, which both had attended. Sometime between 7 and 7:30 p.m., Theresa entered the Entre Deux restaurant in the town of Compton, where several students were having supper. As she was not carrying her handbag, she pulled out some money from her sweater pocket and asked for change at the cash for the cigarette machine. She purchased a pack of Players Light and handed out cigarettes from that pack to 3 of the students who asked her for some. Again, she appeared her normal self to everyone there. Shortly afterwards, she left the restaurant, and a couple of other students there followed her out a couple of minutes later and walked about 100 feet behind her. They noticed her returning to the residence, but could not see which building she entered. According to Joey Nice, Theresa arrived at her residence in Pointe Claire at approximately 10 p.m. and proceeded to talk excitedly about an experiment conducted in her humanitarians class with Professor Alan Rod. A few days earlier, this was a sort of meditation exercise. Theresa apparently slept at Joey's that night and left early next morning. She never went up to see Heidi Mueller, as she usually did when in the building. And in fact, Heidi only found out about Theresa's visit almost 3 weeks later, when Theresa's boyfriend, Vlad Kulish, was told of this event by Joey Nice, and he in turn related it to Heidi. The latter appears to be very skeptical about the whole incident and is very surprised that Joey had not told her about it before. Theresa then returned to Lennoxville on Monday morning, October 30th, 1978, and spent the rest of an uneventful week as per her schedule. On Tuesday, October 31st, 1978, she told Ian Catterall that she had made it to Montreal on Sunday night in exactly 2 hours, which would indicate a departure time from Compton of 8 p.m. On Friday, November 3rd, 1978, Theresa had told Caroline Greenwood that she would not be able to visit the latter's residence in Hemmingford because she had to work on a book report that weekend. She also told other students that she would not be leaving the campus for that same reason. At 6 p.m., Theresa met Josie Steppenhorst and Suzanne Jerome in the cafeteria in Lennoxville. She asked Josie for a cigarette, asked the 2 girls if they would be in Compton that evening, and stated that she would drop in on them around 9:30 p.m. that night. At 9 p.m. that same evening, Sharon Buzzy, met Theresa at the bottom of the main staircase in King's Hall, Compton. Sharon asked Theresa how come she was not at Caroline's and was told of her intention to stay at the residence and work on her book report. At that time, Theresa appeared to be on her way upstairs. We questioned several students who were in the building that night, including the school's football team, who had a curfew to abide by because of a game against Vanier College the next day, but no one remembers seeing Theresa that night. On the evening of Friday, November 3rd, 1978, there were no special events on campus. The Bishop Pub was open. There was a basketball game at the complex, and no activities were scheduled at the rink. During the night, 2 students purchased LSD in Lennoxville, which they later consumed in Compton. One was found unconscious outside on campus and suffered a serious case of exposure, from which he later recovered. The seller involved has not been identified. Theresa does not appear to have a serious drug habit, but she did try on occasion in the past cocaine, amphetamines, marijuana, hashish, and mescaline. She is known to have smoked marijuana on campus with classmates and friends. After 9 p.m. on Friday, November 3rd, 1978, no one has come forward to state that they have seen or heard from Theresa. The only items missing from her room appear to be the clothes she was wearing, as well as a book entitled Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, Informal Talks on Zen Meditation and Practice by Shunryu Suzuki, which she borrowed from Professor Alan Rodd in order to summarize it that weekend in the form of an assigned book report. Note: Professor Rodd states that Theresa did not appear to have a particular interest in that subject, which was one of many from which the students had to choose for that assignment. Theresa's telephone and address book was found in her room, though she normally carried it with her whenever she went up to Montreal. Other articles of clothing, which she normally wore whenever traveling, e.g. her hiking shoes, were found to be still in her room. Theresa's personal life appears to be stable and normal. She has several friends, but only one boyfriend at the present time. Her assets are more than adequate for her needs. Her performance as a student is well above average, and her family life is harmonious. She has not shown any indication of being bothered by a problem of a serious nature, and her relations with those around her have remained good and unchanged over the last several months. 3. Questions not yet resolved. There are several matters which our inquiries have not yet been able to clarify to our satisfaction, and their relevance to Theresa's disappearance cannot be assessed at this point. How did the letter from Theresa's grandparents end up once again in her mailbox after her disappearance? What is the significance of the inscription in her handwriting, McGreer 110 afternoon? The room is used by the counseling service. Was the young woman who went to Les Picard's residence in Birchtown on November 7th, 1978, in fact Theresa? Who is the girl with the red hair and the scar under her right eye who asked Jane Finley if she had seen Theresa after her disappearance? Why is Theresa's telephone and address book not in her handbag as it usually was? If Joanne Laurie and Ian Catterall really did first see that there were no textbooks on the top shelf of Theresa's locker when they went through it after her disappearance was noted, how did those textbooks get there later before the locker was reopened? Why did Theresa go down to Montreal on the evening of Sunday, October 29th, 1978? Did she head for or return to Montreal for the same reason on the evening of November 3rd, 1978? 4. Conclusion. Based on the information available to us at this time, we feel that the events surrounding the disappearance of Theresa probably occurred in the following manner. Theresa left Compton that night and headed for Montreal in the same manner, and for the same reason as she had the previous Sunday night. She may not have made it to Montreal, having encountered someone on her way there who has forced or persuaded her to remain with him, her, or who has caused her death. She may have reached Montreal and contacted Joey Nice, who is covering up because of something which happened after she arrived. We cannot state with any greater degree of certainty the final explanation of Theresa's disappearance at this point. We feel that our investigation must now focus on her Montreal friends and contacts. Metropole Bureau Investigation, Robert M. Bulak, Director. So that's it. That's Robert Bulak's report to my father. And actually, I just found the cover letter that came with this. It was actually mailed to my father on December 26, 1978. Yeah, happy holidays. And I'll read this cover letter because it's kind of instructive. Dear Mr. Allure, please find attached our interim report in the matter of the disappearance of your daughter, Theresa. We are pursuing our inquiries and will continue to keep you informed of our findings on a regular basis by telephone. In the meantime, please find enclosed our invoice for services rendered as of December 15th, 1978. Your remittance would be appreciated as our expenses in this matter are significant. We are also forwarding a copy of an article which appeared last week in the Journal of Montreal. Director Hamill, that was the police director who was leading up the investigation from the police side, Director Hamill states that the article is pure fabrication and that he was never even contacted by the reporter who wrote the story. We do, however, hope that it may stir interest in the affair and might make someone come forward with pertinent information. Now, the article that he's referring to is one. The headline with it was, I believe, Theresa Allure, A History of Drugs. And then one other thing I want to read to you is the sort of disappearance notice that the police sent out. You know, it's your typical thing where it has a picture of Theresa Allure and then it kind of gives you the particulars. Miss Theresa Allure disappeared from Champlain College, Lennoxville, Quebec, since November 3rd, 1978, and she's not been seen since. She's born in 1959 in Ontario. She lived in Compton, Quebec, a distance of 12.8 kilometers from college, so I was wrong, it wasn't 10, it's 12.8. At the moment of her disappearance, she was wearing a white T-shirt, corduroy pants that were blue, and small shoes which are described as ballet shoes, sometimes described as ballet slippers or Chinese slippers. And it says here, anyone with information of this to please contact Mr. Leo Hamel, Chief of Police, from the Lennoxville Police Department. It also notes that Theresa habitually hitchhiked. And, you know, all of this stuff, the article about drugs, the hitchhiking, I can understand why they might inform the public of the hitchhiking. It is would be of note, certainly to a driver who might have seen a girl hitchhiking, but it also implicitly suggests, certainly at that time, that if you hitchhiked, you got what you deserved. So we begin this pattern of blaming the victim. And certainly the suggestions of drugs, I think smoking marijuana nowadays with the overall legalization of marijuana, we don't think too much of it. But I can tell you back in 1978, you were considered pretty much by society a social deviant if you indulged in drug activity, marijuana, let alone mescaline, cocaine. I was very young at the time, but I can't tell you that my sister was a recreational user. I wasn't aware of it, which is a good thing. I mean, she wasn't smoking in the house, that's for sure. She was probably just indulging and experimenting as a typical 19-year-old teenager would. But, what to make of Bulak's report, and I read that out because, there's all kinds of interesting little suggestions in there. A lot of it I've never discussed before, because in light of when and how she was eventually found, a lot of that stuff became irrelevant. Nevertheless, at the time when you had a missing person, the slightest thing could be suggestive of something of greater importance. I would simply note that clearly, because she was reading books about Zen, some people got it in their head that she went away and disappeared into a monastery. You see that Bulak clearly was checking monasteries, and I can only suppose that he made that connection. I think the comment of Alan Rodd, her professor, is probably the most important thing. It had nothing to do with that. It was simply that she was studying the subject and she had to write a book report on it. Nothing more than that. And then you see the probably most unfortunate is the decision is made to focus the investigation. At the end of Bulak's report, the decision is made to focus the investigation on Montreal. They come to the conclusion that she must have gone back to Montreal. And again, there's the implication here by some of the things in the report, the fact that she talks to a student named Ian Catterall and says that she made it back to Montreal in 2 hours. Ian Catterall was known at that time to have been distributing drugs to the student population. So obviously, I think the suggestion here is that Theresa was going back to Montreal on a regular basis, picking up drugs from an associate, running them back to the Lennoxville Champlain campus, at which point Ian Catterall would distribute them to students. Remarkable that my sister had the criminal mastermind abilities to set up shop as a runner and dealer, all within 6 weeks of attending that college. Never mind the fact that the idea is absurd for another reason, in that no one needed, number one, to run drugs in from Montreal, particularly something like LSD. LSD was cooked in the woods of the eastern townships by the local Hells Angels. And then to bring up the Hells Angels, there's no way you could be running large quantities of marijuana or cocaine or anything like that independently from Montreal into Sherbrooke. They controlled that distribution network. And if you want to go further and then say, well, then, clearly Theresa was in with the Hells Angels, you can certainly go ahead and entertain that possibility. I find that notion, based on evidence, to be completely absurd. But nevertheless, that is the direction that people in position of authority were leaning at that time. Talk about some other details that are important to the disappearance. Probably most significantly, on Saturday, November 4th, 1978, the day after Theresa's disappearance, two hunters named Stephen Mendingo and Samuel Burnham, they are hunting in the woods near Lake Memphremagog. They are just off a road called Chemin-Guière, and Chemin-Guière is just south of Magog. And they're in the woods. They're a couple of 100 feet into the woods. And on a log, they noticed folded, they described this as folded, a pair of dark pants and a light-colored T-shirt. In some reports, it's identified as a flowered T-shirt, folded and sitting there. On about 2 weeks later, November 15th, 1978, Mandingo and Burnham go back into the woods to try to identify the clothing. And I believe this is because at that time, by the 15th, the word was out that a student was missing. So they go back, but they are unable to find the location of the clothing, or the clothing has been moved. Now, the Guerre location of this clothing will become more significant as we talk about other cases. In particular, the murder of Louise Camera, whose body was found maybe a half mile from that location where these hunters claim to have seen this clothing. So I want to jump now forward through the winter months, January, March 1979. There's little activity on this affair. And then finally on April 13th, Friday the 13th, 1979, a hunter named Robert Ride is he's setting muskrat traps, which are little wire traps, and he goes to sort of this it's a small creek, or you might even call it a bog because the water is so stagnant, off a road called Chemin de la Station, which is in Compton. It's about a mile from the residence where Theresa lived, and he's along the shores of this standing body of water, and he notices what he describes. At first he thinks it looks like a mannequin, and what it is the body of Theresa Lohr. It's face down in the water, in only her underwear. Police arrive at the scene. In the adjacent farmer's field, they find two pieces of scarf, kind of in proximity, maybe a couple of 100 feet apart from each other. It's not really known whether that scarf was it in pieces because it broke being used as a ligature around the neck. Was it in pieces because it got chopped up by a combine or something? It was an active field, I believe a cornfield, so I'm not really sure which. Then about a week after that, another farmer, an apple farmer named Viator Gosselin, is driving his tractor down Chemin McDonald. Chemin McDonald it's no longer there, I don't think, but it was a road just south of Lennoxville. And by the side of the road, he spots a red wallet. I have no idea how he saw it, but he did. Perhaps over the course of the winter, it was lodged in a snowbank. The snow melted, and then it became visible. But it's a red wallet. It contains Theresa's ID. It's identified as Theresa's wallet. So at this point, there is a potential major crime. The provincial police are brought in, kind of the equivalent in the United States of the state police, under the direction of Corporal Roch Goudreau. He takes over the investigation from Leo Hamel, the town chief of police. And they obviously at this point they have to work quickly because we're into the spring and students will begin to be leaving for the summer holiday. They do a series of interviews. Interviews with students over the course of late April in order to get everybody before they leave. They predominantly focus on students. I've read those reports. They are. It's almost as if They are fed the answers by police. If you read them, they are all confoundedly similar in their tone, which suggests that they're being fed information. A lot of focus on did Theresa not do drugs. So and of course everyone denies this. Every single one is, I never saw, whether you did or you not, everyone, you'd be a fool to say that you witnessed another student doing drugs. But they all invariably say yes or no, I did know Theresa, she was a good student. I never saw her do drugs. So clearly they have a theory, and they're leaning on it. Into the fall of that year, there's some final meetings. My father meets with Leo Hamel, Roch Goudreau, and Robert Bulak, the private investigator. Although not all at once, these guys were kind of rivals and they didn't like being around each other. But they quickly focus in on their pet theory, and I have some of the notes from that, where so this is my father's theory. He says it's a drug overdose, and these are scribbles on the back of an envelope. Obviously, there's a pusher, and there needed to be someone with a car. And he says that the idea of a hardened criminal is all wrong. And that possibly some things don't tie in. For instance, why the scarf? Where are the clothes? His comment is the wallet is a diversion, and I think by that what he's suggesting is we're made to think that the crime or some activity took place in a location other than it really did. It's noted that Robert Bulak agrees with this. He says theory probably correct. One male, one female, one car. And subsequently, I know Leo Hamel believed this, and certainly Robert Bulak did, or excuse me, Roch Goudreau did. Goudreau went on camera in the early 2000s and explicitly stated at the time, I still think it's a drug overdose. So that's how it is left. Goudreau's comment, and this is typical of the police, he says, people aren't telling everything, but close the door. Few things will remain silent. And I've seen that time and time again, that the police is, rather than vigilance, that their approach is, if we just wait, people will eventually talk. Which I find absurd. I find that when the police do nothing and you wait, people shut up and think that they got away with things. But nevertheless, that is the approach of Quebec's Sûreté du Québec in that epoch, and certainly in the modern era. If I can rant a little bit, Sûreté du Québec thinks that if you create a cold case website and put a bunch of pictures on the website, that automatically means people are going to start phoning in and giving them information, rather than being vigilant and out in the field and shaking the bushes, which they tend, in my experience, not to do. There's one other area I'd like to focus on, and that's the question of where was Theresa Allure last seen. On the one hand, we have two students who see her in the dining hall, and another student who witnesses her missing the last bus in Lennoxville at the campus of Champlain College. And then the suggestion that possibly she stayed behind and worked in the library on some homework, and then possibly ventured out to the corner across the street from the Lion Pub, which was sort of the main street corner in Lennoxville, stuck her thumb out and hitchhiked. was picked up, and then something went awry, and the body was dumped on Chemin de la Station. So that's one possible trajectory. The second possible trajectory, which is problematic, is that she hitchhiked back to Compton, to the residence at King's Hall and Gilliard, and made it back there. And the suggestion that supports this idea is the sighting at 9 p.m. on the evening of November 3rd by Sharon Buzzy, in which Sharon Buzzy saw her standing on the steps, the entranceway at King's Hall. Buzzy's statement saying that she saw Theresa on the night of November 3rd on the steps at King's Hall was generally discounted by the police investigators, because her statement was taken by the Sûreté de Québec 5.5 months later. They tended to think that she was confusing weekends, that what she had actually witnessed was something that happened possibly the Friday prior to November 3rd. But it's hard to discount it, because what's missing is, in fact, Robert Bulak interviewed Buzzy within weeks of Theresa's disappearance. He was the first one to interview her, not any police agency. So when she told Bulak that she saw her on the steps, that had happened within 14 days. So it would have been very, very fresh in her mind. I spoke with Sharon Buzzy in the 2000s. I tracked her down. She was living out west. I phoned her up. When I identified myself and told her what I was doing, the first thing out of her mouth was, "Yes, I am absolutely positive I saw your sister at 9 o'clock on the evening of November 3rd, 1978. Without any prompting or anything, that was her first response to me after more than 20 years of this event taking place. There is another sighting from November 3rd. Another student, Tamara Westall, claims to have seen Theresa in the kitchen in King's Hall on November 3rd, right around 9 or 9:30. Tamara Westall's account of things is problematic because, in her case, that statement was taken. It was taken on April 25th, 1979. So, in fact, 5.5 to 6 months later. In that case, I think we could state that maybe she was confusing weekends or days, and she might have had the wrong day. And then in both cases, the problem is that both witnesses didn't see her at the same time. What would be optimal is if we had two or more people, recounting the same event, but we don't. We have individual statements. With no one else having witnessed this event, and that's what makes it so problematic to say, okay, was she in fact in the Compton residence that night, or was she not? So, what of that? So, if she did make it back, what happened? Of course, you have the authorities' theory, which is, well, what happened is then she went upstairs. And contrary to everything that we're told, where she's studying, and it's a quiet night on campus, apart from the LSD incident, which we talked about. But apart from that, the football team's in bed, everyone's sleeping, there's not a lot of activity. She's going to do homework, she's going to go listen to records. What really happened was a drug event. She overdosed, some students panicked. They escorted the body off campus in one of the students' cars, and they deposited the body off Chemin de la Station, went back to school. That was that. That's the police's theory. My idea with that is a couple of possibilities. As was her habit sometimes, she may have at that point on that Friday night walked into the village to buy cigarettes, and an event happened at that time. She was picked up or confronted by somebody there, and then the murder took place shortly thereafter, and the perpetrator disposes of the body off Chemin de la Station. Another possibility is the person who picked her up from Lennoxville to Compton, dropped her off in Compton, and waited, lingered, possibly knew her patterns of behavior, possibly was not ready at the time that he was transporting her to do anything. Possibly something went wrong that prevented him from doing what they were going to do, but nevertheless dropped her off and then lingered. And then another opportunity, lo and behold, presented itself. Theresa exits the building. Perhaps he was at the Entre Deux bar having a drink, and she walked in, and he got another opportunity to carry out his plan. And possibly that's what happened. So those are the basic guts of the case as it was investigated and as it was left in the late 1970s. That kind of gives you the construct on which to build from. Of course, the case remained dormant for over 20 years, and it wasn't until the early 2000s when I began to investigate it on my own, along with the investigative journalist Patricia Pearson, that obviously the perspective, the lens on this changed significantly. In future episodes, we can talk about a lot of things, but I thought it was important to give the basic framework on which to build from for someone who was not aware of this, who wanted to understand the beginnings, the origins of it, that they would have that framework. I would imagine this leads to a lot of questions, and you are certainly welcome to contact me with your questions, and I would be more than happy to answer them for you. I have an email set up. It's theresalore@gmail.com. You can just email me there. It's THERESAALLORE, all one word, @gmail.com. If you drop me a note or a question, or if you have suggestions about specific topics or cases you want me to discuss, I'd be more than happy to do it. That's all for now, and until next time, this is John Allore for Who Killed Theresa. Thanks for listening.